In today's video, I'll be revealing the craziest World War II secrets that were buried underground. By the end of this video, you'll understand why treasure hunters are still digging up Europe and Asia looking for Nazi gold, and why farmers in France find enough unexploded shells every year to fill a warehouse. Yamashita's gold. General Tomoyuki Yamashita commanded Japanese forces in the Philippines during the final years of the war, according to legend. He buried over 6,000 tons of looted gold, jewels, and artifacts in caves and tunnels around Manila and Baguio before the Americans arrived. The treasure supposedly included a 1-ton golden Buddha statue and enough wealth to fund Japan's entire post-war recovery. The story gets crazier because a Filipino locksmith named Rogelio Roxas claimed he actually found part of it in 1971. He said he discovered a golden Buddha and gold bars in a tunnel, then had everything seized by dictator Ferdinand Marcos. Roxas sued the Marcos estate and won a judgment worth $22 billion in 1996. Courts verified he found something real, but historians like Ambeth Ocampo say there's zero evidence the full treasure hoard ever existed. The entire myth traces back to an organization called Golden Lily, allegedly run by Prince Yasuhito Chichibu to loot conquered territories starting in 1931. Author Sterling Seagrave wrote books claiming the loot was meant for rebuilding Japan after defeat. Yet decades of searches across the Philippines have turned up nothing close to 6,000 tons. The legend probably grew from real Japanese looting, mixed with post-war conspiracy theories, but it created a treasure hunting industry that still operates today. But if Yamashita's gold might be fantasy, the next treasure on our list definitely existed because the Nazis literally stole it from a palace, and people watched them do it. Amber Room. Picture a room where every wall is covered in amber panels, backed with gold leaf, mirrors, and precious stone. That's the Amber Room, gifted by Prussia to Russia in 1716 and installed in Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg. It covered about 592 square feet and became one of the world's most valuable art pieces. The Nazis looted it during Operation Barbarossa in 1941. German forces dismantled the panels, packed them in crates, and shipped them to Königsberg Castle in Prussia for display. By 1944, Allied bombing was destroying German cities and the panels disappeared. Most historians believe they burned in the Königsberg bombing raid or fires that consumed the castle. Russia built a replica that opened in 2003 after decades of work. Yet treasure hunters still claim the original panels were buried in tunnels or mines before the city fell. Some think they're in a lake near Kaliningrad. Others say they're in secret bunkers. Zero proof exists for any of these theories. The Amber Room is almost certainly ash, but the myth refuses to die because people can't accept that something so valuable just burned. The thing about Nazi looted treasure is they supposedly buried so much of it that entire trains full of gold could vanish into Polish mountains without a trace. Or could they? Nazi gold train. This legend claims that in 1945, as Soviet forces closed in, the Nazis loaded an armored train with 300 tons of gold, art, and jewels, then hid it in tunnels near Wałbrzych in Poland's Owl Mountain. The train was supposedly connected to Project Reese, a massive unfinished tunnel complex the Nazis built using slave labor. In 2015, two men announced they'd found it using ground-penetrating radar and demanded a finder's fee. The Polish government took it seriously enough to authorize searches. Army engineers spent years investigating the area with modern equipment. They found absolutely nothing. No train, no treasure, no sealed tunnels. The governor of Lower Silesia publicly stated there was no proof. Historians say the story is urban legend, probably born from real Nazi construction projects in the region, mixed with desperate looting as the war ended. Project Reese itself is real. 9 kilometers of tunnels that the Germans never finished, possibly intended as armaments factories or command center. 3,000 slave laborers died building it, but no gold train. The legend boosted tourism in Wałbrzych by 44% in 2016, so maybe that was the real treasure all along. Still, the Nazis did actually hide stuff in underground facilities, and some of those facilities were designed to launch weapons that could have changed the entire war if they'd worked. La Coupole. The Germans built this massive concrete dome in northern France specifically to store and launch V2 rockets at London. Construction started in 1943 using slave labor from concentration camps. The dome was 5 meters thick, designed to withstand Allied bombing. It could house equipment for launching rockets and shelter over 1,000 personnel. Allied intelligence identified it during Operation Crossbow, a campaign to destroy V weapon sites before they became operational. British and American bombers hit La Coupole repeatedly with tallboy bombs, massive 5-ton penetrators designed by Barnes-Wallis. The raids damaged the facility enough that the Germans never completed it. If La Coupole had gone operational, London would have faced sustained V2 attacks that could have killed thousands more civilians and disrupted the invasion buildup. Churchill called the V weapon threat the most devastating attack of all. After liberation, La Coupole became a museum. You can tour the tunnels and see exactly how close the Germans came to launching rockets from an indestructible underground fortress. But La Coupole wasn't the only V-weapon site the Nazis tried hiding underground. They went even bigger with a project that would have made D-Day exponentially harder. Mimoyeks Complex. The Nazis carved this artillery base into chalk hills near the French coast, planning to install V3 superguns that could fire 600 rounds per hour at London from 95 miles away. The complex featured tunnels and chambers to house 50 massive cannons. If operational, it could have bombarded southern England constantly, making invasion preparations nearly impossible. The facility was part of Hitler's Fortress Europe defense strategy, meant to complement V1 and V2 attack. Canadian forces discovered Mimoyeks in 1944 after Normandy landing. They found the tunnels abandoned and the guns never installed, partly because RAF Tallboy raids had damaged key section. The complex shows how desperately Germany tried moving weapons production underground, as Allied air superiority made surface facilities death trap. Walking through Mimoyekes today, you see the scale of engineering involved and understand why the Allies devoted so many bombing runs to shutting it down before it could threaten the invasion. Speaking of desperate underground projects, the Nazis built one facility so large it required hundreds of thousands of slave laborers and still never got finished. Project Reese. Reese means giant in German, and that's exactly what the Nazis tried building in Poland's Owl Mountain. 7 separate underground complexes, covering 9 kilometers of tunnel, carved from 1943 to 1945. The purpose remains disputed. Some historians think it was meant for armaments production. Others believe Hitler planned it as a new Führer headquarters away from Allied bombing. What's certain is the human cost. The project used slave labor from concentration camps, working prisoners to death in brutal conditions. Around 5,000 people died during construction. Workers excavated over 100,000 cubic meters of rock using primitive equipment. The Germans never finished any complex before the Red Army arrived. Today, the tunnels sit empty and partially collapsed. Tourist attractions that show the scale of Nazi megaproject. The connection to the gold train myth comes from these tunnels, people assuming the Nazis hid treasure in unfinished section before fleeing, but searches have found nothing. Project Reese stands as a monument to wasted resource and human suffering in service of a losing war. Now let's talk about the Axis facilities that weren't just military installation, but actual horror shows where they conducted experiments that make your skin crawl. Unit 731, Bunker. Japanese forces built this underground facility in China, specifically for biological warfare experiment. Unit 731 operated from 1941 to 1945, conducting tests on living prisoners to develop plague bomb, frostbite weapon, and diseases for use against civilians. The bunker featured U-shaped lab spaces where they performed vivisection, pressure chamber tests, and infection study. Recent excavations have exposed parts of the facility after decades of Chinese government investigation. Unit 731 killed at least 12,000 people through experiments described by survivors as pure horror. They'd infect prisoners with plague to study transmission rates, freeze limbs to test frostbite treatment, perform surgery without anesthesia to see how long people survived. After Japan surrendered, the United States granted immunity to Unit 731 leaders in exchange for their research data. The cover-up lasted until declassification in recent years. The bunker's discovery confirms what historians knew from testimony, but couldn't prove physically. It's underground evidence of atrocities that Japan still struggles to acknowledge officially. But biological weapons weren't the only military research happening underground. The British built their own secret bases for a very different purpose. British Auxiliary Unit. While the Nazis built fortresses, Britain prepared for invasion by hiding resistance bases in forests across the countryside. Starting in 1940, they constructed over 600 underground bunkers disguised as innocent structures or buried in remote locations. Each bunker held 6 to 8 people and supplies, including weapons, explosives, ration, and rum. The plan was simple, yet brutal. If Germany invaded, these units would stay hidden while the army fought openly, then emerged to conduct guerrilla warfare behind enemy lines. They'd sabotage supply lines, assassinate officers, and cause chaos with hit-and-run attacks. Members were told they'd probably survive about 2 weeks. The bunkers featured corrugated iron chambers buried 12 to 20 feet deep, with concealed entrances using tricks like fake tree trunks or badger den. Some had doorbell alert systems using a marble in a tin can. Germany never invaded, so the units disbanded in 1944 without firing a shot. Most bunkers were sealed and forgotten. Decades later, people rediscovered them rotting in forests, their physical proof of how seriously Britain took invasion threat, willing to train citizens for suicide missions to resist occupation. The British also used underground spaces to protect cultural treasures from German bomb, and those hiding spots saved some of humanity's greatest art, London underground art. When the Blitz started pounding London in 1940, museum officials faced a crisis. How do you protect irreplaceable artifacts from bombs that could flatten entire city blocks? Their solution was hiding collections in subway tunnels, quarries, and caves across Britain. The National Gallery moved paintings to a quarry in Wales. The British Museum protected the Elgin marbles with walls of sand-filled concrete blocks. These weren't casual moves. Teams carefully transported fragile items through blackout condition, often at night to avoid bombers. Underground storage protected pieces from direct hits and fires that consumed surface building. Climate control in caves proved challenging. Conservators had to monitor humidity constantly to prevent damage. The operation showed Allied priority. They'd rather risk losing battles than lose cultural heritage. After the war, everything came back intact. Those underground hiding spots are why you can see the Elgin marbles today, instead of reading about them in history books as casualties of Nazi bombing campaign. But not every buried treasure stayed buried, and some of what people claim to find sparked legal battles that lasted decades. Roxas Buddha discovery. In 1971, Filipino locksmith Rogelio Roxas said he found a golden Buddha statue weighing 1 ton inside a tunnel near Baguio. He claimed it was part of Yamashita's gold, complete with human skeletons and booby trap. Roxas brought the Buddha to his home, along with gold bars he'd supposedly discovered with it. Then, Ferdinand Marcos allegedly sent soldiers to confiscate everything. Roxas got tortured, and the treasure vanished into Marcos' family vault. Years later, after Marcos fled to Hawaii, Roxas sued the estate for theft. The case dragged through courts for decades. In 1996, a jury awarded Roxas $22 billion, though he died before collecting. The verdict verified he found something real. But it didn't prove the larger Yamashita hoard exists. Marcos' wealth came from corruption and embezzlement, not buried treasure. The case fueled more treasure hunting across the Philippines. Opportunists still dig up mountains looking for gold that probably isn't there, sometimes causing landslides or property damage. The golden Buddha itself disappeared into private collection, or melted down, leaving only court documents as proof it existed. Now here's where things get darker, because while people searched for gold that might be imaginary, they kept finding bombs that were very real and still deadly. Unexploded ordnance. About 10% of bombs dropped during World War II never exploded. That means millions of shells, grenades, and bombs are still buried across Europe and Asia, waiting to detonate if disturbed. France and Belgium collect hundreds of tons annually in what locals call the iron harvest, finding ordnance while plowing fields or digging foundation. Bomb disposal teams constantly work defusing discoveries. Germany alone has cleared over 2,000 tons of ordnance since 1945, and they estimate decades more work remain. People have died from accidentally triggering old munition while gardening or hiking. Construction projects get delayed when workers hit buried bombs. It's the war's longest-lasting physical threat, killing people who weren't born when the bombs fell. Modern technology helps locate ordnance before it causes harm, but you can't scan every square mile of former battlefield. The iron harvest will continue as long as bombs remain buried, but ordnance wasn't always abandoned accidentally. Both sides deliberately cached weapons underground for future use, creating arsenals that authorities are still discovering. Tokyo weapons cache. Similar caches turn up across former war zones whenever construction or excavation disturbs old hiding spots. The find shocked authority because it suggested organized concealment rather than battle debris. Investigators believe Japanese forces buried supplies near the war's end, either for continued resistance or to hide evidence of military stockpiles. Similar caches turn up across former war zones whenever construction or excavation disturbs old hiding spots. Latvia found buried weapons in 2024 from retreating German forces. These discoveries raise questions about what else remains hidden. Did resistance groups maintain secret arsenals? Were occupation forces preparing for last stands? Most caches contain conventional weapons, like rifles and grenades, but the possibility of chemical or biological materials makes each discovery potentially hazardous. Authorities treat cache investigations seriously because 80-year-old explosives are unpredictable. The Tokyo find proves that urban areas aren't exempt from buried secrets, and modern development constantly risks exposing dangerous remnants from conflicts we thought were finished. Speaking of dangerous remnants, the Nazis buried one particular treasure that involved a Nobel Prize winner and a desperate attempt to hide gold from invading armies: dissolved Nobel metal. When Germany invaded Denmark in 1940, physicist Niels Bohr faced a problem. He possessed Nobel Prize gold medals belonging to German scientists Max von Laue and James Frank, who'd sent them to Denmark to keep them from Nazi confiscation. Taking them out of the country risked discovery. Hiding them risked seizure. Bohr's colleague, George de Hevesy, came up with a brilliant solution. They dissolved the gold metals in aqua regia, a mixture of acids that turns gold into orange liquid. The solution sat in unmarked jars on laboratory shelves, while German soldiers searched the building multiple times during occupation. Nobody noticed the unassuming containers held liquefied Nobel Prizes. After liberation, de Hevesy precipitated the gold back out of solution and sent it to Sweden, where the Nobel Foundation recast the metal and returned them to their owner. It's one of the war's cleverest hiding tricks, turning valuable metal into camouflaged liquid that occupiers literally walked past without realizing what they missed. But while scientists hid metals in acid, museums were moving entire collections into mines that happened to be perfect for art storage. Austrian salt mine. The Nazis stashed thousands of stolen artworks in salt mines across Austria, taking advantage of stable temperatures and low humidity that naturally preserved materials. The Altusay mine became the primary storage site for looted treasures, including works by Michelangelo, Vermeer, and Rembrandt. By 1945, it held over 6,000 paintings, plus sculptures and artifacts. Hitler planned to display the collection in a museum he wanted built in Linz. As Allied forces approached, Nazi officials received orders to destroy everything rather than let it be captured. Mine workers sabotaged the demolition by removing detonators and flooding entrance tunnels. Monuments. Men officers discovered the cache intact in May 1945. The recovery operation took months, carefully extracting fragile artworks from deep underground chambers. Using salt mines showed the Nazis understood preservation requirements, but their looting operation stole cultural heritage from across occupied Europe. Most pieces got returned to original owners or institutions after the war. The mines themselves became tourist attractions, where you can see the chambers that protected art from bombs and saved it from destruction. Now let's talk about the most famous underground structure from the entire war, where Hitler spent his final days while Berlin burned above him. Führerbunker. Hitler's personal command bunker sat beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden in Berlin, about 28 feet underground, with about 6.5 feet of concrete overhead for protection. Construction finished in 1944, creating a cramped facility with around 30 rooms, including Hitler's quarters, conference spaces, and support areas. Ventilation systems filtered air, and diesel generators provided power. Hitler moved in permanently by January 1945 as Soviet artillery pounded Berlin. He conducted the war's final strategic decisions from the bunker, issuing increasingly delusional orders to armies that no longer existed. On April 30th, with Red Army soldiers blocks away, Hitler shot himself in his study. Staff burned his body in a shell crater outside. Soviet forces captured the bunker on May 2nd and spent years investigating the site. East Germany sealed and buried most of it during the 70s. Today, it sits beneath a parking lot with only a small information panel marking the location. The Führerbunker represents the final collapse of Nazi Germany, where the leader who'd conquered most of Europe died in a concrete hole while his capital city fell apart. But Hitler wasn't the only leader using underground command centers. The Allies built them too, and one became the nerve center for Britain's entire war effort, Churchill War Room. While Hitler hid in Berlin, Churchill ran Britain's government from the Cabinet War Room beneath Westminster in central London. The facility started as a basement conversion in 1938, expanded during the war into a complex with meeting rooms, dormitories, and communication equipment connecting to military headquarters worldwide. Churchill and his cabinet made critical decisions here during the Blitz, safe from bombs that devastated the city above. The rooms included a map room that tracked military operations constantly, with officers updating battle positions around the clock. Churchill's bedroom was tiny. He rarely slept there, preferring to work until exhaustion forced rest. The facility had reinforced ceiling, but wouldn't survive a direct hit from heavy bombs. Its real protection came from secrecy and luck. After victory in Europe, the rooms were locked and forgotten for decades. Britain opened them as a museum in 1984. You can see everything exactly as it was left, from pins and wall maps to papers on desks. Walking through these cramped corridors shows how Britain's leadership operated underground, while citizens endured bombing overhead. Now here's something that sounds like fiction, but was absolutely real. The British prepared one underground facility where observers would hide during German occupation to spy on their own country, Operation Tracer. In 1942, Britain feared Germany might capture Gibraltar, cutting off Mediterranean access. Intelligence decided that if invasion came, they'd leave 6 men sealed inside a secret chamber carved into the rock of Gibraltar. These observers would spend years in total isolation, monitoring German naval movements through hidden periscopes and reporting via radio. Workers built the chamber with supplies for 7 men for a year, later extended to accommodate longer stays. The team would be sealed in permanently, with no exit, expected to survive in total darkness, except when observing. They'd dispose of waste through hidden pipes and subsist on stored rations. The mission bordered on insane, asking men to volunteer for indefinite imprisonment while their country was occupied. Germany never invaded Gibraltar, so the chamber went unused. It remained sealed and forgotten until rediscovery in the 90s. Operation Tracer shows how far Britain would go preparing for worst-case scenarios, willing to entomb people alive to maintain intelligence gathering. The chamber still exists inside Gibraltar, a monument to the kind of sacrifice intelligence agencies considered acceptable during total war. But while the British built spy chambers, the Germans were burying something much larger in the Italian countryside. Kesselring's gold. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring commanded German forces in Italy during the painful fighting retreat up the peninsula. According to legends, he buried a massive treasure somewhere near the Gothic line, the defensive position Germans held in northern Italy through 1944 and 1945. The supposed hoard included looted Italian gold, art, and valuables worth hundreds of millions. Treasure hunters have searched for decades without success. Some focus on Lake Como, others on Mountain Tunnel. No credible evidence supports the treasure's existence. Kesselring faced war crimes trial after surrender, but was never charged with art theft. Most of his supposed loot probably never existed or was spent funding the defense. The legend persists because Italy suffered extensive looting, and people want to believe those losses could be recovered. In reality, anything Kesselring's forces stole likely got shipped to Germany or lost during the chaotic retreat. The Italian countryside keeps its secrets if they ever existed, buried too well or simply never there in the first place. Let's shift to the Pacific, where the Japanese did something similar to Project Reese, but with way more caves and way less concrete. Philippines Tunnel Network. Japanese forces carved extensive tunnel systems across the Philippines during their occupation from 1942 to 1945, preparing defensive positions for the American invasion they knew was coming. These weren't like European bunkers with concrete reinforcement. They were rough-cut passages through volcanic rock and limestone, some connecting natural caves into networks stretching miles. The tunnels served multiple purposes. Some housed troops and supplies during the fighting. Others allegedly hid looted treasure, according to Yamashita legend. Many contained booby traps, mines, and poisoned stakes to kill anyone entering after Japanese withdrawal. American forces cleared thousands of Japanese soldiers from these tunnels during the liberation, often using flamethrowers and explosives because conventional assault was too costly. After the war, locals used tunnels for shelter and storage. Treasure hunters still explore them looking for gold, sometimes dying when old traps trigger or ceiling collapse. The networks show how the Japanese prepared for desperate last stand, turning entire islands into fortified positions where every cave could hide soldiers. Most tunnels today are blocked or too dangerous to explore, keeping whatever remains inside sealed away. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the weirdest World War II weapons you never heard about, click the video on the screen.